I'm trying to figure out where to start this because today would have been a day after the Human Rights Day and the End Femicide protests, which turned in a very uncalled for direction. And I feel like different people are still processing it. I went live and I shared a video which I think quite a number of people have seen. And I remember thinking to myself when we started marching and I was seeing bits of smoke, and I remember thinking, oh, maybe somebody didn't put out a fire. There's no way we could have anticipated that there was going to be tear gas. But the rest, as they say, is history. By now we know that the protests were unlawfully infiltrated, if I can say that. And I think it was just the level of unfair, I want to say violence, that was meted out on protesters for something very peaceful and for something that's about justice for women. And so I could talk about many aspects of what happened on Sunday, but I feel like there's 1, 2, 3 things that continue to come to mind. And the first one is, it's not possible to sustain these antics. And I think that's what the government needs to know. You cannot sustain oppression and tactics that push people back when people are asking for their rights. We've seen it play out for thousands of years in history, and it doesn't end well. We're also in a time when people are so much more self-aware and aware of their rights and aware of justice. And so for every aspect of agitation, of activism, being met with violence, for how long? Those are archaic tactics that no longer serve us in this day and age. I don't know what's going to happen. I feel like now we just need to, first of all, we're all going, hopefully, many of us are going for a Christmas break. We really need to rethink and feed ourselves the momentum to keep carrying forward the push for justice. Man, by the way, sijailewa how? You're trying to host a Grammys for 500 million shillings and people can't afford medical care. So that's the second thing, is just living in a country with people who are tone deaf, but they're supposed to be leading us. And you know, a lot of people are no longer afraid to call out poor leadership. We've seen it in different parts of the world. And December 10th, June 25th and December 10th were clear examples that we do not have people who are ready to lead a country. First of all, we're the majority. We're the ones who put you there, you know? And so for you to gaslight us when people are pushing back and saying, don't vaccinate the livestock, and you're saying people are mad. When people are saying Shifsha is no longer working or we don't understand how it works, and you're saying whatever, you'll figure it out. For people to be happy that a deal which was made, I believe, unlawfully, and a whistleblower came and put it out in the open, and eventually it had to be reversed, and then you say, how can you be celebrating when something that was going to, you know, generate wealth for the country? No, we already know that the people in power are serving themselves. And until they can show us otherwise, why stop us from raising the obvious? And I've talked about accountability. I've talked about it for all of us. This is not just us pointing fingers at leadership. It's also about us being able to be brave enough and bold enough to step out and say, you need to end femicide. What happened to the 100 million? The running joke is that, was it invested in tear gas? So we also have a right to ask questions. There's been so much brutal killing, slaying of women in a way that makes all of us nervous. And that's the best you could do on Human Rights Day. We've had so many men who died during the Reject Finance Bill protest. Actually, as I speak today, I saw somewhere that Rex's hearing is today, December 11th. And Rex was, I believe, the first death. And we cannot forget these people. Guys, we cannot forget the people who died during the protests and the women who've died as a result of femicide. We do this for them, and we do this so that we can make sure that their memory isn't tainted by the injustice that continues around them. So tone deaf, archaic, and the whataboutisms. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of a word called whataboutism. Let me tell you what it is. It's when there's a subject being discussed and you come back and say, what about? Listen, anybody who's taking to the streets right now is pushing for human rights for everyone. There's nothing wrong in specializing every so often. End femicide was for the women who died. Tomorrow it could be end period poverty. Another day could be protect our children. But you cannot have those protests happening and you want to co-opt it by saying, what about the? No, please stop being fooled into thinking that anybody's life is more precious than the other. Everybody's life is special, everybody's life. We know as women the risks it is just living as a woman. And so, yeah, we are going to protest for ending femicide. It doesn't take away the fact that we also protested against the finance bill and also protested against the killings of the young people, especially young men who died during those protests. Please stop bringing whataboutisms. Please understand, the very same way that you say what about, none of us, it's fair game, guys. None of us is exactly going to be safer or treated better than the other. That is the reality of the country we live in. So take away whataboutism. Be present on a day when something is being commemorated, and stop trying to hijack it. Stop trying to say things like people are being paid, feminists are being paid to take to the streets. That's wild of you to say, considering we could die being out there. I've said it before and I'll say it again. By the time somebody is protesting, it is not a flex. It's not for clout chasing. It's not for the timeline. Injustice is injustice, and your selective hate perpetuates the oppressor's blanket condemnation on all of our rights, including yours. And please don't hate being Kenyan. I saw a lot of people saying, Aki being Kenyan. I think we're unhappy with how Kenya is being run. But I have never been prouder of being Kenyan in my life than this year. And I think it took a shift in our voices being amplified to shift so many of us within. We're coming together more collectively. I know that there's still siloed types of hate speech and character assassination. Unfortunately, that doesn't go anywhere. We're living in a time when the digital space also really has to be monitored because it's hurting a lot of people unnecessarily. But in other places, it's been used to hold people accountable. But I'm proud of us. I'm very proud of Kenyans for coming together and saying we deserve better. And we will take to the streets every day if we have to push for what we want. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of us. We can hate the way things are being run, that's valid, but let's not lose sight in the fact that we're proud that we've come this far. We haven't seen this since the Sabasaba rally in the 90s, not this kind of collective activism. So I think that needs to continue to fuel our fire for justice. There's also something that I've been saying, and especially started saying it when I came from the Reykjavik Global Forum. And I've quoted her a few times, and I've quoted this a few times, about the woman who talked about us needing to pay attention, and that in her country, a year into her sounding the alarm, the women in her country are oppressed. But here's the thing, guys, we really need to pay attention. We need to pay attention to escalating violence against women, because it is escalating. Femicide isn't just a tragedy, it's a symptom of a deeper societal failure. Women are being harassed, attacked, and killed, yet the response remains hollow. And if we don't address it now, it will only get worse. So pay attention even to snide jokes, to sexist remarks. Pay attention to people who defend and say, oh, but she shouldn't have been wearing. Pay attention. We have to pay attention, and then we need to act. We have to pay attention to the pushback on human rights. From protesters being silenced with violence to subtle harassment of those advocating for change, the message is clear. Standing up for injustice is being seen as a threat, but we cannot let fear win. It's interesting, in a state of shock, I put out on X saying, please don't go to town. And somebody came back and said, Janet, no, don't tell people to stop going to town. That's how you let them win. And I remember I actually had to reshare that post. I agreed with the person. I said, you know what, you're right. I did put that up in a state of shock, but I think the point they were trying to make is that's what people want. It's valid though. People's lives are compromised, and that's a valid fear. So some people might be like, I'll advocate from home. But let's pay attention to the constant harassment. I love how people came back on the streets in numbers, even after all of us had been dispersed by tear gas. Pay attention to the subtle and obvious patterns. Harassment, intimidation, violence, whether subtle or overt, are used to maintain the status quo. These aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a broader culture that needs to change. Guys, we're pushing back against the system. It's systemic change against people who completely invalidate our concerns and fears. And so it's going to take a lot from us and a lot for us to keep the conversations going. We need to pay attention to the subtle and to the outright. That is my biggest thing. And I need everybody to hear that. Pay attention. Because it's only when we pay attention and act on it that we're able to stop a cycle or stop a moment from becoming a cycle, right? So pay attention when we go home for Christmas. We need to be present with our family. It's been a tough year for Kenyans. It's been a tough year for a lot of people around the world. We need to pay attention when we're back at the workplace and back in school. We need to pay attention when we're back in the streets or back in places of advocacy, back online. We need to pay attention because whatever we begin to normalize now, and it's not too late. Sometimes I know it just feels like, it is just utter madness. But we need to pay attention to the everyday statements and moments that could either stop us or propel us to the next phase of our life. Please, let's pay attention collectively. Report back online what you've paid attention to, what you're seeing. Pick up on the subtle messages that are very troubling. Because guess what, guys? 29 years ago, the women who went to Beijing paid attention enough to go there and say, we deserve rights for women. 29 years later, a lot of things have happened. In as much as we've had progress on rights, we've had pushback. We looked up one day and we had an infiltration on the rights of women's voices and bodies and autonomy, an infiltration on young men's ability to protest. So we need to pay attention and we need to stop letting these infiltrations and subtleties or open, outrageous statements and let them go. We can't let things slide anymore. And I love that we're doing that more than ever. So I don't know what's to come, to be honest, but I'm confident that it gets ugly before it gets better. And that while we're there, for those of us in faith, we pray on it, we seek counsel, we form a community around each other, guys. When I see these marches and protests, I can see people forming communities because that's support. That we hold space for each other when we're grieving and when we're angry and sad and hurt and confused. We let that happen. We hold space when people are aggravated enough to go back to the streets and cuss people out, cuss people who are supposed to be leading us out. And we hold space for the promise of what can come, which is, I believe we're in one of the greatest countries in the world, with some of the smartest people in the world. And so let's not forget that when we're paying attention and holding space. I don't know. I don't think this is the last video I'll do before the year ends. I don't think it is. Maybe I'll do one or two more. I'm not sure what I'll talk about because I almost feel burnt out, to be honest. I'm hopeful, but I'm also feeling a bit burnt out. Keep working with organizations, which you can list below. A lot of the organizations that are at the forefront of human rights, Usikimye, Amnesty International, Law Society of Kenya, End Femicide. You can also support the work we do with the Nuadada, Heals for Pads, a lot of organizations. Tap in, hold space, pay attention, and don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. So much more to be gained from being out there and vocal than from being quiet and complicit. It's official with Janet Mbugua. I can't wait for us to continue these conversations because I'm planning on having some pretty interesting conversations in the coming months, and I can't wait for you guys to be a part of them. In the meantime, tukutane online ama kwa ground. Peace.